Hi. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a painter who was forgotten for a long time. His name is Firmino Monteiro. To begin with, I would like you to see this portrait. It is a portrait of Firmino Monteiro painted by a French painter named Emma Mourou. We hardly know anything more about this painter, but this little painting is there in the reserve of the National Museum of Fine Arts in Rio de Janeiro. Look at how delicate it is, right? This painting is a small one, 14 centimeters tall, and it is painted on porcelain. What we imagine is that this Emma Mourou may have been a student of Firmino Monteiro, but we do not know for sure. The other thing we can observe in this portrait is Firmino's proud posture. Look at how he has a pose that shows he is very self-assured. This same type of attitude will be mentioned by another painter, Antonio Barreiras, who wrote a book about his life. But there is a passage in this book where Barreiras shares a little about Firmino. I will read this excerpt for you. I spent about 3 years in Europe. Upon returning to Brazil, I held an exhibition at the Academy of Fine Arts. At that very occasion, Firmino Monteiro had a large exhibition of his works in one of the galleries. Firmino Monteiro was extremely vain. He considered himself the only valuable artist in Brazil. Because of this, he did not go very far. Barreiras here is not very friendly towards Firmino, suggesting that he did not go very far. But what we can perceive is that there was indeed a climate of rivalry among the artists during this period. What do we know about Firmino Monteiro? We know that he was born in 1855 and that in the 1870s he enrolled as a student at the Academy of Fine Arts. The first official news we have about him is from 1879, when the professors of the Academy of Fine Arts nominated his painting Exequies of Camorim for purchase. This painting Exequies of Camorim is currently displayed at the National Museum of Fine Arts. When we look at it without noticing the title, we only see a landscape, the forests, and this rock. And when we look more closely, we realize that there is a small group of figures there. In fact, it is inspired by a poem by Gonçalves Magalhães, The Confederation of the Tamoios. And he chose an episode that is the death of an indigenous person, and there is the funeral of this indigenous person being held. There at the National Museum of Fine Arts, in addition to the Exequies of Camorim, there is a second painting by Firmino Monteiro that is permanently displayed in the Gallery of 7 and 19. It is in a very prominent location, as it is next to the First Mass in Brazil. So, this great historical painting by Vitor Meirelles of the First Mass in Brazil. Next to it, on the left wall, we can see the painting by Firmino Monteiro, which is what you are seeing now, called the Poem to the Virgin. In this painting, we see Father José del Chieta writing the poem in the sand to the Virgin Mary. What do we observe here in the details? How Firmino Monteiro was exceptional, a master in the way he paints the sand, all the details, and also in the colors, in the afternoon light that he captures in this painting. And these are qualities that he will be highly praised for and will receive much acclaim from critics for the mastery he has in the composition of landscapes. Firmino Monteiro will become well known for his landscapes. In fact, he will have a large production of paintings that are very diverse. He will paint still lifes, historical paintings, landscapes. In short, a series of this quite varied production. But he will be much more praised for his landscapes than for his figures. Angelo Agostini, for example, whom we have already talked about here, this caricaturist Mordaes, will make a critique of a painting by Firmino Monteiro, which was Captain João Homem. He compares these figures as if they were little puppets from a puppet theater. In fact, if we look at the painting, we can see that Firmino Monteiro really had difficulty in representing human figures. Captain João Homem is currently at the Imperial Museum of Petropolis, but he was part of the General Exhibition of 1884. In this General Exhibition of 1884, Firmino Monteiro exhibited 27 paintings, so you can see his production. Among these 27, 2 paintings were widely discussed in the press by critics. Gonzaga Duque and Felix Ferreira, who were the most important critics during this period, will comment on these works by Firmino Monteiro. So what were these 2 paintings? One was The Death of Camões, and the other was Vidigal. The death of Camões is currently located here in Rio de Janeiro, permanently displayed at the Royal Portuguese Reading Room, which is a beautiful building situated in the city center near Tiradentes Square. Inside, there is this room where you can see some images of the painting by Firmino Monteiro. However, once again, Angelo Agostini wouldn't leave Firmino alone. Just look at the caricature he makes of this painting, the cartoon he creates about this painting of Camões. Firmino places the dead Camões on the bed. And there is a woman, a figure, dressed in black, who is holding Camões' hand. But Angelo Agostini will write the following. A monk of a night, astonished to see Camões, 8 days after his death, pulling a black cloth to cover himself from the cold that the painting inspires. Cold, right? He takes advantage of this criticism to joke, because the person dressed in black there blends in with the covering over Camões' body, and at the same time, he speaks of the coldness of the painting. One thing we can comment on is that Firmino is being quite traditional. He is seeking the subjects of his paintings in history, in the grand history of heroes, such as the case of Camões, this Portuguese poet. Other subjects he explores in small stories of other characters who were often talked about, but who are not major figures in history, such as Major Vidigal, which is the second painting I will discuss with you, and which was quite successful and highly praised back in '84. Who was Vidigal? Major Vidigal was the police chief. He served there from the late 18th century until the 1820s, and he will be known. There will be little songs about him, telling of the repression he carried out. He will repress, for example, candomblés, popular festivals. He will truly be the instrument of repression at that moment. Also suppressing thefts, etc. In this piece by Firmino, he shows Major Vidigal with his companions, talking to a man who has a guitar. You can see there that he has that guitar hanging. So it is precisely one of those scenes in which they are there repressing this type of popular demonstration. Major Vidigal became well known through the book by Manuel Antonio de Almeida, which was Memoirs of the Sergeant of Militia, published in 1854. This book is going to be very successful, and probably that is what leads the beloved Monteiro to choose this theme to represent in the painting he will exhibit in 1884. What is curious is that we no longer have the first version of this painting. We do not know where it is located. There is a second version, which is the one you are seeing, that was painted around 1883, or perhaps even a little after the exhibition in 1884. Because in fact, the painting that was exhibited in 1884, we know that there was a small critique about the clothing of this musician. There was a comment saying that he was wearing a scarf on his head, and that this was a garment much more Spanish than Brazilian. And why are we also sure that this painting you are seeing here is not the original that was exhibited in '84? Because in 1884, an illustrated catalogue of the Salon was published. And in this illustrated catalogue, we have a drawing that reproduces the painting by Firmino Monteiro, which is what you are seeing here now. And we can notice that there are small differences between this drawing and the painting, which is currently in a private collection. But in any case, we can see that from the descriptions that appeared in the press at the time about the painting, this second version has a lot to do with the first. Because in the descriptions they will praise a lot all his attention to detail in the cobblestones, where a weed is sprouting around, in the tiles, in all the architectural details. All of this is highly praised. We can really see how Firmino did very well in this detailing. A curiosity about Major Vidigal is that nowadays when we hear about Vidigal, what do we think of? The Vidigal Hill in the Vidigal community. And it seems that, could it have anything to do with it? Yes, it has everything to do with it, because in fact the name of Moro do Vidigal is due to Major Vidigal, because he would have received this land from the Benedictine monks there in 1822 as a thank you for the services rendered. There are already some academic works on Firmino Monteiro, One of them is the master's thesis of Giovanna Lois Moreira, which was defended at the Federal University of Juiz de Fora, supervised by Maralice Cristo. In this dissertation, Giovanna Lois Moreira will draw attention to a painting that marked the beginning of Firmino Monteiro's career, which was the foundation of the city of Rio de Janeiro. This painting is permanently displayed at the City Council here in Rio, over there in Cinelindia. So it is a painting that many people may have seen, but perhaps they do not know much about the painter who created this artwork. In this painting by Firmino Monteiro, he will also be widely publicized in the newspapers because he holds two exhibitions. A first exhibition at the National Typography in 1881. Then, in 1882, he held a new exhibition of this painting under his own nickname, and the painting ended up being sold and acquired by the municipality, so much so that today it is located at the City Council. It is a historical painting within the tradition, telling an important fact from the history of the city. On the other hand, Gonzaga Duque, who is an important critic of this period, will say the following, that while this painting was significant for Firmino's career, it diverted him from his true talent, which was to be a landscape painter. Because what Gonzaga Duque truly admired were the landscapes of Firmino Monteiro. Just to give you an idea, I will read a little excerpt from a critique he made about these landscape paintings. It was in 1885 that Firmino Monteiro is now holding an exhibition in a private gallery, and Gonzaga Duque will talk about some of the more important works. He then says the following. After this more important work, there are some small paintings, magnificent landscapes, taken from nature. From nature is a French term that means painted outdoors in front of the subject. So there are some small paintings, landscapes taken from nature, in which we find the elegant firmness of the brushes of Firmino Monteiro. In paintings number 14 and 15, there is proof of his undeniable value as a landscape painter. Both represent a part of the Bay of Rio de Janeiro, with the majestic Serra dos Órgãos on the horizon. The first is Effect of the Afternoon at 6 o'clock. The second, Effect of Noon, belongs to the amateur illustrator Mr. Guilherme Martins. At first glance, the two paintings appear sharp, worked on slowly, line by line, stroke by stroke, preparing the tones of the effects on the palette. But when observed closely, they are splendid. The canvas was covered in 3 or 4 brush strokes, light, confident, without hesitation, without shyness. It is the immediate impression of what the artist received. What can we perceive in this critique, in this praise that Gonzaga Duque is giving to Firmino Monteiro's landscapes? When he talks about this quick thing, the quick brush strokes, this impression, he is indicating a certain proximity to Impressionism. Other critics have also mentioned this. This was something that surprised me. I was doing research recently on Impressionism in Brazil. In the newspapers of the time, there were a couple of instances where the name Firmino Monteiro appeared associated with Impressionism. I had never thought of Firmino Monteiro as an impressionist. From these critiques and by observing his landscapes more closely, we begin to realize that, in fact, there is some impressionist influence. And how could he have had that? In fact, he was in France about 3 times, in France and Italy. These trips to Europe were considered fundamental during this period at the end of the 19th century. All Brazilian artists, in order to truly consider themselves fully trained and to be recognized, needed to be in Europe during this period. Firmino Monteiro wanted this so much that in 1878, when a competition was opened for the travel prize to Europe, he applied and requested to take an exam in a subject which was mathematics in order to enroll, because in fact, he had not yet completed that course. And the regulations stated that it should have been completed. The teachers initially authorized him, as we can see here in this document. And a second document shows that the director was bothered by this. He will write to the minister. He will explain the case and will say, "Look, minister, actually the regulation does not allow this. How are you going to position yourself?" And in the minister's response, the minister will say that indeed Firmino Monteiro cannot compete for this prize because he has not yet finished the course. Even so, this was in 78, and in 79 he manages to sell the painting, that is, of Camerim, and he travels to Europe. So you can see how Firmino Monteiro was the kind of guy who managed to create strategies to achieve his goals. So he is going to travel to Europe in 1880, and he will stay there until 1881. When he returns, he comes back and holds an exhibition. This will happen 3 times in his career. He sells a painting for money, he goes, travels to Europe, he comes back and holds exhibitions. He is going to be a very dedicated and committed painter. Another episode that we notice about how he will know how to resolve things is that he manages to... It's a very good expression, but that's it. In 1887, he was contacted to be a teacher at the School of Arts in Bahia. He then traveled to Bahia, where he spent 5 months working as a teacher at the school. And during those 5 months, he managed to produce 2 important works of historical painting that would be acquired by the school. One of them is the Sacrifice of João Angelica. This dedication that Firmino Monteiro had, we will notice because he registered again for the competition. This time he could participate, which was the competition that took place in 1881 for the position of landscape painting teacher at the academy. So he will really participate in this competition, but he will not win. The winner of this competition will be Leoncio Vieira. One day I can tell a bit of my story as well as that of Leoncio Vieira, which is quite interesting. This competition for landscape painting teachers has something very interesting, which is actually quite rare. Some of the works created as submissions for this competition are preserved. They are kept in the National Museum of Fine Arts in the museum's reserve. And here I will show 2 of them. This first one is the painting made by Firmino Monteiro, in which we see this sepia painting on paper, and in the background we can see the mountains next to Andaraí. And now, comparing this painting of the boy with that of Leoncio, who was the winner, we notice the same mountain profile in the background. Why? Because in fact there were 3 candidates, the 2 plus another one who was the Mexican. All candidates had to be located on the hill of Santo Antonio, and they all had to look in the same direction, which was already determined in the competition's regulations. So it is a competition that was well documented and very interesting for us to see how this process unfolded. In the case of our conversation here, it is important for us to realize how Firmino was this fighter, this character who did not allow himself to be discouraged. He took advantage of every opportunity that arose, and what we can also notice is how the newspapers of the time constantly reported on Firmino Monteiro. There are news articles about him appearing all the time. It's truly incredible and impressive. Everything that we don't hear much about Firmino Monteiro these days, back in the 1880s, there were always, from time to time, news about Firmino Monteiro, because he was constantly creating some exhibition, or he would travel to Europe, come back, and hold another exhibition. Another issue that appeared in newspapers was regarding the death of Firmino Monteiro. Firmino Monteiro will die in July 1888. Several newspapers will report on this death. Many of the first cover with drawings depicting Firmino Monteiro. So all of this shows the importance that this painter had at that moment. He truly achieved artistic recognition. In those newspaper articles we read about Firmino Monteiro, there is a quite interesting piece of information, which is to show his closeness to Pedro II and Princess Isabella. So there is an exhibition that he is going to hold at the Inslee Pacheco Gallery, which was run by a photographer who was also quite close to Pedro II, and the news in the newspapers covers the emperor's visit and the paintings that the emperor commented on. So we can perceive this approval that the emperor had for Firmino. And already in 1888, another news article comes out in the newspaper, commenting on a visit that Princess Isabel will make to the Imperial Chapel, and she will be accompanied by Firmino Monteiro. It is mentioned in this news that the services of Firmino Monteiro will be contracted for the restoration of paintings in this chapel. So we can see how he has this relationship. This relationship between Firmino Monteiro and Princess Isabel is also reported by Antonio Pareras. Right at the beginning, I mentioned that Antonio Pareras spoke poorly of Firmino Monteiro, saying that Firmino Monteiro considered himself the only important artist of his time. In fact, Antonio Pareras continues this story. He explains why he is saying this. Then he recounts the following, that Firmino Monteiro had organized a large exhibition at the Academy, and that he asked the professors to find the Brazilian flag on the facade of the building. And the teacher said, "No, there is no reason to raise the Brazilian flag because of your exhibition." What does the first maltster do? He goes to talk to Princess Isabel. Princess Isabel will speak with the teachers. As a result, they raised the flag of Brazil. So, it's quite an interesting story to illustrate this type of relationship. This shows how he was truly tireless. And probably all indications suggest that Firmino Monteiro's effort had to be even greater because he was a black painter. And now it is the first time I am referring to the fact that he is a black painter, because it is quite curious that all the news that comes out about him in the 19th century, all the critiques that are published about him in the 19th century, at no point refer to Firmino Monteiro as a black painter. And yet we know that black students at the Academy were not rare. In fact, they were quite numerous. We can see this in photographs from the time, and also because we know the names of some of them who stood out even more than Firmino Monteiro. For example, Estevão Silva. Estevão Silva is a painter whose works are still valued today as the best still life paintings of the period, and there are very interesting stories about him that we will discuss here one day as well. A little further on, in the early 20th century, there are the Timóteo da Costa brothers, who were also very successful black painters. All these studies about black painters have become increasingly important, and researchers have been delving into their lives and careers. They were also greatly encouraged by the creation of the Afro Brazil Museum, which was established in 2004 in São Paulo at the initiative of Emmanuel Araújo. Therefore, Emmanuel Araújo's role in these studies was extremely important, and it is still very important, not only because of the creation of the Afro Brazil Museum, but also because of the exhibitions that were held there. And I hope that from this conversation we had, I can somehow encourage other people to research these painters. That's it.